This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast that deals with the dark feminine. I'm Breachberg, and our subject for this week's podcast is going to be Cliodhna, who is considered in Ireland to be the queen of the Banshees. And she has a very special connection as a Banshee, or even just as a fairy-type deity, goddess figure. Sometimes it's a little unclear specifically what she, whether she's really a goddess, whether she's a fairy woman, whether she's a Banshee, whether she's a mixture of those things. But she is definitely associated, she's said to be really a deity or a special patroness of the South Munster coast area, and she also seems to be associated with Cork as well. The families she seems to be particularly associated with are the O'Keefes and the O'Donovans, and there are also narratives that associate her with some others, the McCarthys, the Fitzgeralds, and the O'Collins family as well. So what I want to do in this particular episode is talk about Cliodhna. I'm going to talk about her stories, and I've got two sources. Obviously, I tend to start with Wikipedia if I think it's got a good, basic narrative. But I'm also looking at emeraldisle.ie, which is a collection of Irish folklore, obviously out of Ireland itself. And we're going to look a little bit at her background, her stories. And once we finish talking about her stories, I found some interesting themes that I think are worth talking about here. Particularly, there's a lot here connected to water mythology. And there's also, she is a type of a love goddess, so there is something about her status as a goddess of love and beauty, and those whom she does love, especially mortals. There seems to be a certain message or implication in that tells us something about what I would consider to be the drama of the anima. So let's begin by looking at her stories. Okay, so Cliodhna, it says in Irish mythology, is a queen of the Banshees of the Tuatha De Danann. Cliodhna of Carrigtleena is the potent banshee that rules as queen over the fairies of South Munster or Desmond. In some Irish myths, Cliodhna is a goddess of love and beauty and the patron of County Cork. She is said to have 3 brightly colored birds who eat apples from an otherworldly tree, that would be a tree in Tir na nÓg, which is the land of youth, and whose sweet song heals sickness. She had her palace in the heart of a pile of rocks, about 5 miles or 8 kilometers from Mallow, which is still commonly known by the name of Carrigtleena, and numerous legends about her are told above the Munster peasantry, who considered her their benefactor. So, as we can see, she's considered to be this beneficent force, although she can also be a dangerous force as well, particularly when she takes a particular interest in someone. They could be disappeared. And there's a particular story about her that is connected to her. She's connected to Manannán Mac Lir, who is the god of the sea, who is her father. Her father is one of the druids, who the chief druid of Manannán Mac Lir, and so she lives in this other world. And there's a story of her coming out of the other world into this world, which we're going to take a look at. In fact, let's look at the stories first before we go back into her family connections. So here we are in emeraldisle.ie. It says she's referred to as a tragic beauty. Her name was Cliodhna, and she was one of the most beautiful women of the Tuatha De Danann, that vanished sorceress race whose legends echo still from one end of Ireland to the other. Some even say she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and she was worshipped as a goddess by pagans of Ireland who followed the fall of the Tuatha. She was one of 3 daughters of Gebin, the chief druid of the sea god Manannán Mac Lir, who had a particular fondness for her, much to her detriment, and was known for guarding against blighted crops and protecting animals, particularly cattle, from disease and the evil eye. And of course, if you remember, or anything I've said in the past about Ireland, or if you simply know anything about its history, you know that cattle are quite important. Owning cattle is the same as having wealth. She was reputed to be able to change into a wren, as she did to escape one young mortal who had learned her magic, or into a white hare. Okay, so she has this shape-shifting kind of quality, which is quite similarly, it's a similar characteristic of other fairy figures who can change shape. She had 3 birds, which ate of the fruit of the magical apple tree growing in Tir na Nog, the land of youth, and also in, I'm not sure if this is Tir Tarngire, I'm not sure I'm going to say that right, the land of promise, and Machmael, the pleasant plain. Their bright song could sing anyone into a deep sleep, which would heal all wounds, sicknesses, and injuries. Now, that's an interesting thing to kind of take note of for what we're going to discuss later. Together with Avel and Anya, she was one of the 3 goddesses of Munster. She had a great rivalry with Avel, and I think I'm saying her name right, and both of the women fell in love with a young chieftain called O'Keefe. His fancy was for Avel, though, and they were engaged to be married. Cliodhna called on the help of an old wise woman skilled in dark and twisting arts, and Avel began to fade away. Cliodhna told her she'd be cured if she renounced the love of O'Keefe, but Avel refused, so Cliodhna gave her a lash of a magic wand, which turned her into a white cat. Okay, we see a white hare here, a white cat. Later, O'Keefe, not knowing where his bride-to-be had vanished off to, agreed to marry Cliodhna, but the old wise woman confessed to her part in the crime and gave him the wand to turn the cat back into a woman. Now, in other versions, he gets Cliodhna to admit to this, and after many years of happy marriage, the woman confesses on her deathbed, but then Cliodhna says, well, I don't have the wand anymore, so I can't change her back. It's interesting because even though she does this to her sister, she does seem to have a good relationship to her. Where she is hidden away, she's put into this beautiful palace, so she's not in this terrible place. But her sister can sometimes change from her cat form, according to this, but she can never fully be changed back because of this loss of this magic. So now in this particular version that they're telling here, it says it was Cliodhna's turn to spend some time as a cat. For when he heard the full story, he tapped her with it and regained his bride in the next stroke. So, there's, again, that's another, I've heard 2 different versions of that, but this is another one. She had many titles, among them Queen of the Banshees, for it was said she ruled those spirits who sent up a bone-chilling wail before a death among one of the ancient families of Ireland. These were the Sheog, the fairy women of the hills, South Munster, known as Cork and Kerry today. Cliodhna would travel from her palace beneath Carreg Cliodhna, Cliodhna's rock, to send forth one of her sister subjects when the shadow of death stretched its hand over the descendants of those who had worshipped her. Yeah, one thing about Banshees is that they tend to be connected to particular families. So a family will have a particular Banshee that appears when there's a significant death occurring in the family. It was said that there was no morning of the year when Cliodhna wasn't outside of that Carreg before sunrise combing her long hair. She was especially associated with the McCarthys, Fitzgeralds, O'Donovans, O'Collins, O'Keefes, and O'Learys as well, but in particular the O'Donovans, who came south before St. Patrick landed, abandoning their worship of the goddess Mongfiend, I think, I'm not sure if that's the way to say it, for the love of Cliodhna. In later times, one of the chieftains was referred to as the Dragon of Cliodhna. So let's see, there's and in the Four Masters, there's actually an account here. On the O'Donovans, it says, Cliodhna's Rock, anglicized as Carreg Cliodhna, is a couple of hours southwest of Mallow in the parish of Kilshannig, and the nearby stone circle has a reputation as a door to the other world, where Cliodhna betimes leads her fairy women in slow dances under the waxing moon. Another rock, Carreg Cliodhnamore, off Inch Strand, 2 miles south and east of Ross Carbery, is known by the locals as the seat of this goddess and a path to the underworld. Her palace plays a central part in a story about a man called Sean McShamus, an Irish prince. Bewitched by a beautiful stranger he met during a feast at his father's hall, he bit a piece of apple she gave him before falling into a swoon. Now again, he falls into a swoon, and it's interesting because the apple is very much connected with sacred knowledge, especially in the Celtic system. Because when you cut an apple open, you have that kind of 5-pointed star in the center with the seeds, and those seeds tend to represent the sort of the secrets of that power of the earth, among other things. So, and of course, we also know the association with the apples of the other world. But in all of these cases, there's this idea of falling into a swoon. We have another story like that as well. Cliodhna took his prostrate figure and carried him away to the rock, trapping him within and inside the other world. In desperation, he wrote a letter in blood, slipping it out of a crack and into the whipping wind, which carried to a cowherd. Once the king heard about this, he sought the help of a wise woman who went to the rock, and waiting until Cliodhna was brushing her hair in the morning, grabbed a handful and twisted it painfully in such a way that Cliodhna could not look at her, since her mother warned, "If she lays eyes on you, you're finished." She refused to release Cliodhna until the young prince was freed, and so it was done. She was also said to lure young men to their doom in the watery grave, which claimed her mortal form, for she left the safety of her fairy country to pursue a young man called, I think it's Siobhan of the Curling Locks, but Manannán mac Lir grew jealous, so while her lover was away hunting, she rested her head on the strand at Glandor, the harbour of the oak trees between Skibbereen and Clonakilty. Treacherous Manannán sent his mystical bard Chthonia to play magical music, which put her into a far deeper sleep, and then she was drowned by a great wave. Okay, so, yeah, whether she was drowned or not, again, there's stories that vary as to whether she was drowned or she was simply swept away. She swore a prophecy thereafter that one day all of Munster would be swallowed by a terrible wave. And to this very day, every ninth wave, the strongest or any particularly loud wave in the area, is called Tonn Cliodhna or Cliodhna's tide. Fishermen in Cork still think it's bad luck to see a woman on the shore before you set out to sea. Nor was her power forgotten until long after the Christianization of Ireland, for it was Fat Cormac McCarthy who ran into legal trouble while building his castle at Blarney in the 15th century, and he beseeched the ancient power for help. So she is connected to the Blarney stone as well. It says she appeared to him, kissed his lips, and told him to kiss the first stone he found in the morning on his way to court. As a result, he pled his case with great eloquence and won, finishing his castle shortly thereafter that. Thus the Blarney stone is said to grant the ability to deceive without offending, and Cormac was so pleased that he had the stone built into the wall at Blarney Castle, where countless numbers of people visit every year to kiss the stone and get Cliodhna's gift for themselves. So powerful were its effects that even Queen Elizabeth said in frustration she could not complete a negotiation with Cormac McCarthy to get her hands on his seat at Blarney Castle, since everything he said was Blarney as what he says he does not mean. So Blarney was kind of seen as being a kind of deception or a kind of an art or, basically rubbish or BS. And of course this would be Queen Elizabeth I. Some stories about Cliodhna show her as dark and sinister, a dangerous and fatal figure, while others speak of her love and kindness, which may be why she remains so fascinating to this day. Among those who took a special interest in her were Irish revolutionary Michael Collins, who heard about her in the Rosscarbery school he attended, and they took Sunday trips to Cliodhna's Rock. Here, according to Michael's friend, Michael heard many wonderful tales of Cliodhna's enchantments, of wrecks and perils, drowning and treasure trove. Collins was descended from the O'Collins, and the O'Donovans were tribes, and then wondered where that great son of Ireland and some have wondered whether that great son of Ireland heard the mournful song of the Banshee before his fateful last day, right? Because he was connected to both the O'Collins and the O'Donovans. So there's a bit of a poem here. They refer to her as O'Donovan's daughter, but this is obviously a reference to her. Now, some of the other stories that we have, associated legends. We have the people who are mentioned. Like I said, it was not only the O'Donovans and the O'Collins, but the McCarthys, the Fitzgeralds, the O'Keefes. And again, in all of these, there tends to be a story connecting her to love in some way, or her falling in love with someone. It's, Shebam of the Curling Hair, son of the King of Ulster. He decided to leave Ireland by boat, but he encountered great white waves as big as mountains, which, there actually could be some reality to that, because the waves along the Irish coast are pretty fierce. He was saved by the sea by a rider on a dark grey horse with a golden bridle. They then reached the Land of Promise, an otherworldly land ruled by Manannán as their king. Siobhan is entertained at a feast within Manannán city. The chief druid Gebben has a daughter named Cliodhna of the fair hair. When she saw him, she falls in love and agrees to leave with him the next day. Together they sailed to Tate Strand in Ireland. He went to shore to hunt, and left her on the boat. However, the people of Manannán pursued them in ships. One of them treacherously played music, which caused Cliodhna to fall asleep. Okay, we got the sleep theme again. Then a great wave came and swept her away. And the place was then called Tonn Cliodhna, which is near Glandor Harbour. Whether she drowns or not depends on the version being told, along with many other details of the story. Now, it's interesting that her drowning in this way. I don't know if that is a punishment for the young man taking the woman away from the other world. And of course, this would anger the god of the sea. So that's very likely where the idea that this could be Munster's doom might come from. Because it's sort of like, again, Greek myth is my main touchstone. So it would be a bit like angering Poseidon. And the way in which he would, for example, where he pursues Odysseus when he tries to get home. When he's on a raft, he just sends a great wave and, throws him, and he would have drowned except for a nymph, Ino, who saves him. So similarly, you have this kind of idea here of this man who is saved, but then he, takes the daughter, even though she's going very willingly. Her father basically tries to bring her back. Now, the question is it, or rather, I'm sorry, I keep saying that he's her father. He's not her father. Her father is the druid, but Manannan is actually quite fond of her. So this seems to be an unfortunate thing, but the question of whether she dies or not, I suppose, depends on the story. If she is a goddess, or if she is from that realm, there is a chance of these beings dying, but we also hear of them sort of being that these deities probably represent certain forces. Probably there's not a permanent kind of death here. Or most of the time it's if there's a death, like I'm thinking specifically of Macha when they talk about Macha being killed in the second battle of Moytura. Then you hear about her again, because Macha just simply means plain. So the plain might die when it's scorched by the sun. But then, of course, the ground revives itself and it comes back. So whether this is like a permanent ending to Cliodhna, it doesn't feel that way with the Tuatha It feels like there's a there's always this chance that they can be revitalized. We certainly heard about the cauldron of the Dagda, where he could, put the slain warriors in and, bring them back out, alive again, revitalize them. So, I mean, specifically, I don't know whether that's the case with her, but she certainly does appear in a lot of other legends. So, okay, so the voyage of Teague, son of Sionn. The Book of Lismore tells that Teague was the son and heir of Sionn, the king of West Munster. During a raid by an enemy from far-off land, many of their people were abducted and enslaved. Teague and his warriors sent out to rescue them. After rowing for 9 weeks, got that number 9 again, they arrived at a strange land called Inish Derglocha, or Redlock Island. There Teague meets a number of luminaries from Ireland's mythical past. The final person they encounter introduces herself as Cliodhna Fairhead, daughter of Gannon MacTraon of the Tuatha Danann, and she mentions a number of other things. She says, "For now some time I am in this island, and for me Cliodhna's wave in the borders of Munster is denominated. She gives them 3 birds to guide them and provide music, as well as an emerald cup that transforms water into wine." Now that's interesting. Okay, that's an interesting kind of a thing, especially that it's emerald as well. Emerald has this definitely has this association with Ireland. Ireland's referred to as the Emerald Isle. Emerald has a lot of other associations as well, but in particular, this is almost like it almost feels like a cup of sovereignty because of its color. And it transforms water into wine, and since she warns that if Teague is parted from the cup, he will die soon after. Okay, so that is his gift of sovereignty, and of course, yes, the wine this would be an act of sovereignty. This is an act of giving sovereignty, and so to maintain the cup, that is to have that. I think that's really what it's saying there is if you let go of this feminine element, if you let go of this respect or commitment to the land or to the sovereignty, then you will die. And it says, Teague and his warriors depart the island, and after rescuing their kinsmen, they return home victorious. Okay. So the legend of O'Keefe the Druid and his 2 daughters. Now, in the early 8th century, in Fermoy, there lived the last of the Druids. He assisted the king of Munster by summoning a great storm to drive back their enemies. As a reward for his service, he had granted the Druid the title the Prince of Fermoy. The Druid had 2 accomplished and beautiful daughters. The elder was Cliodhna, who could transform into any form she pleased, and was titled Queen of the Fairies. The younger daughter was called Eivil, and was her inseparable companion. So Keith was a prince accomplished in mind and body who inherited a neighboring territory. He was in the habit of visiting the Druid's palace and liked to join in the sports in which he was often victorious. This attracted the admiration of the daughters. Both sisters fell in love. Now you can see where this is going to go. Cliodhna expressed her love openly, and discussions began with her father for marriage. Eivel secretly fell in love and worked to gain his affection by her innocent arts. Keith fell deeply in love with Eivel, but this was quickly discovered by Cliodhna. Because of her jealousy, Cliodhna called on the oldest of her nurses to curse her innocent sister. Eivel was stricken with sickness and the loss of her beauty. Cliodhna pretended to help her by, a powerful sleep mixture, which caused Eivel's apparent death. She was laid in a coffin and displayed before the Druid and his wife, who were filled with sorrow. She was then laid to rest in a tomb under the palace. Cliodhna and the nurse entered the tomb by a secret entrance and moved the still unconscious Eivel to a cave at Castlecourt. When revived, Eivel was told she would be imprisoned there until she forgot about Keith. Cliodhna, seeing it might be impossible to make her forget, and in a fit of jealousy, transformed her into a beautiful white cat. Cliodhna magically changed the cave into a palace, so her sister may bear her suffering more easily. The cave at Castlecourt was said to be filled with treasures of gold and silver, watched over by a white cat that sat on the throne. Cliodhna told Eivel that Keith had fallen in battle with the Danes, but Eivel remained in love with him. For the space of 1 week a year at midsummer, Eivel transformed back into her true form. I feel like I'm saying that name 20 different ways, and I'm sure somebody's gonna be rolling their eyes at that, but nonetheless. Visitors to the cave sometimes saw the cat residing in the palace, surrounded by treasure, but were forced out by a mighty wind or invisible force. When Keith heard of her supposed death, he was filled with sorrow. The Druid and his wife were overcome with grief, and it brought them to an untimely grave. After due time, Keith and Cliodhna were married with much rejoicing. Together they had 3 children and lived in happiness. However, the old nurse fell dangerously ill, and her conscience forced her to confess everything to Keith. The prince went to Cliodhna, but she refused to release her sister. Cliodhna admitted she was unable to return her sister to her true form, as she had lost her precious wand. This caused an irreconcilable division between Keith and Cliodhna, and after some time she retired to her fairy palace at Cliodhna. Keith would often come to ask forgiveness and for the release of Eivel. Cliodhna remained unable to lift the enchantment, but it is said that if one were to come that truly loved Eivel more than her treasures, the enchantment would be lifted. Cliodhna still visits Eivel, and while Eivel briefly resumes her human form, sisters are happy together. Okay, so it's almost that, there's this rivalry, but it doesn't make them into enemies, which is kind of interesting. And taking on the form of a white cat, this kind of the thing that goes on. And as you can see, the Emerald Isle version, there's a different version of the story that says that the wand is recovered and Keith changes Cliodhna into a cat and then marries regains his wife. So, okay, so that story will kind of put that aside in the anima category, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So the legend of Ellen O'Brien and Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald was a youthful chieftain who lived by the banks of the Shannon, County Limerick. He was widely known to be brave, hospitable, and generous, as well as an accomplished harp player. Ellen O'Brien was the only daughter from a chief whose power had crumbled under the Saxon invasion. Fitzgerald loved her and stole her heart with his harp playing. Cliodhna also desired Fitzgerald and resolved to bring him to her unseen hall. On a festival day, a dark cloud descended, enveloped Fitzgerald, and carried him away. For months, no trace of him could be found, and it was generally believed he was taken by enchantment. None felt greater sorrow than Ellen O'Brien, who sought the help of a wizard that lived in Kerry, who communed with beings from the other world. The wizard told her that Fitzgerald had been taken to Cliodhna's favorite residence at Cliodhna. Ellen traveled to that place and pleaded in poetry for Cliodhna to release her lover. She also appealed to Cliodhna's kindness and pledged to die at the foot of the rock if she was denied. Cliodhna was moved by Ellen's plea and released Fitzgerald. They departed and were married soon afterwards and had many happy children. And then the legend of John Fitzjames and Isabel Butler. In 1736, the wedding of John Fitzjames, or Fitzgerald, and Isabel Butler was held. As the wedding was nearing its end, dancing and feasting was underway. Then, as if struck by lightning, John dropped dead at Isabel's feet, and all in attendance were shocked, and it was generally believed he had been transported to fairyland. Friends and associates attempted to make contact with the fairies to bring him back. Kathleen Douve Keating and her daughter Kathleen Ogue traveled to Cliodhna to contact Cliodhna. They covered their clothes in tar and rolled themselves in feathers of different colors. They saw Cliodhna face to face and demanded the return of John, but Cliodhna firmly refused. saying she would keep him for herself. While there are a number of versions of the story, Robert D. Joyce's poem has a happy ending with Cliodhna releasing the groom. And another version, Kathleen Og was the bride. Okay, so as we can see, Cliodhna is very famous she's a very famous fairy queen, famous for stealing men that she likes, regardless of their attachment. And finally, we have the Blarney Stone, and it says, and this is the one that we had discussed earlier for Cormac McCarthy and his ability to speak eloquently, or sometimes to be able to BS very well. And so we've heard that story, so we won't repeat that one. So this is the story stories that we have associated with Cliodhna. There may be other ones, but these are the ones that are most immediately available, and they do give us enough to give us a sense of the myth here and what this, where this might be going. Now, Cliodhna, it says there was a suggestion by J. O'Baron Crow that Cliodhna derives from the Gaulish goddess Chthonia, or Chthondi. So there's not really much said about Chthonia, but the idea that she might be a representation of an earlier figure, that would not be, that's not out of the realm of possibility, certainly. You have a lot of deities throughout this area where you have this kind of combination of what perhaps the original tribe called that being, or their connection to that being, and perhaps, Roman interpolations or interpretations of those beings. There's a lot mixed up in the history of the tribes that are there and the other peoples who have passed through. So the idea that she might have derived from that, whether or not, I haven't really delved into the scholarship of that, but not out of the realm of possibility. And in other media, it says Cliodhna is referred to as an unwelcome pursuer in Edward Walsh's poem O'Donovan's Daughter. And that was the one mentioned on the Emerald Isle site. And it says, in an ode by Muldowney O'Morrison praising Donald O'Donovan upon his ascension to the chiefship of Clan Cahill, he is referred to as the Dragon of Cliodhna. Okay, that we saw. So we have all of these different themes here. So let's look at them. I've made notes about a few of them. So certainly we have this idea of a woman who's very beautiful, gives her kind of the essence of a love goddess as well as queen of the Banshees. Now that's interesting right up front, because the Banshee, we know, is often associated with like an old howling woman, like a very scary woman. But this is an incredibly beautiful woman, Banshee. Okay, so she is not, she's not an ugly old hag. She might be a drowned woman, a beautiful drowned woman. But we have this interesting the theme here, and it says the drowning wave stories differ on whether or not she was drowned, or whether or not she was simply swept back to Manannan's kingdom. The idea of the wave on the beach, that's another theme that we want to kind of get into, and the Tonn Cliodhna as an omen of doom, particularly for Munster. And as we mentioned, this could well be because of a mortal trying to take something from the other world that they shouldn't, even though, again, she went willingly. She wasn't abducted. And, so we have some ideas here about water mythology and about our understanding of what water is as a force, not just physically, but perhaps emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Then we have the theme of the three birds. Okay, so that's, and these three birds have a specific, they are able to heal sickness. The jealous rivalries, the shape-shifting, and then her role as a queen of the Banshees. So she's not just simply another Banshee, she's actually queen of the Banshees, which is interesting. And again, the stories there, I feel like there's definitely a connection to, and the family she benefits is kind of a classic illustration of the anima archetype in action. So let's go back and look at the first one. So what happens in the Drowning Wave story? So she falls in love with this young man who is rescued when he's riding the Irish, the very ferocious Irish Sea. And that whole area is indeed, it's probably some of the most dangerous waters in the world. It's been said, whether you're talking about kind of the North Atlantic side or whether you're talking about the Irish Sea. He's leaving the island, but it's clearly a fairy figure who takes him to the land of promise. and this is where he meets her and falls in love with her and takes her back with him. But of course, Manannán is jealous and doesn't want him to take her. So let's think about the idea of taking this beautiful feminine figure, a figure who in another story offers somebody like a grail, offers him a grail of sovereignty, and to take her to live a mortal life, even with a prince. This idea, I mean, this is not, you hear stories in Irish folklore of fairy folk who come to live with mortals, but it never tends to work out quite well because the mortals, they either don't follow certain rules, or they, like I think of the story of Macha of Ulster, where she comes to live with Chthonia, and then he ends up, one thing she tells him not to do, he does. Right? And then that creates the problem of the horse race. And so Cliodhna, okay, this idea of her as an omen of doom. On the one hand, it's the idea that she's almost like an anima figure, and it's almost like the capturing of the anima, or the conquering of this feminine through love. If she is the one who is taken away, rather than the one who's doing the taking away, right? That this is somehow, there's a drowning that takes place there, right? There's kind of a fatality. It's like one being overcome by love. When one is overcome by the wave of something, if you want to look at it in the psychological sense of flood mythology and things like that, that is where the identity is overwhelmed, right? It's where, or one is overwhelmed by emotions, they drown in emotion. So it's almost as though her feelings cause her to make a decision that he considers to be bad. Okay, now you can argue whether or not it's a good or bad decision, but this decision to leave that world and to come, you kind of almost see that theme like in The Little Mermaid as well, right? I mean, the idea that one who pursues this person, that there's a way in which one is going to inevitably be overcome with this grief. Right, because that kind of love that makes us take those kinds of risks is not one that typically lasts. So she's there, and it's almost like if she had, in her attempt to allow herself to be conquered by him, again, if we think of her as this anima figure, as this water figure, then she has, in a sense, she's given up what she is. If this goddess, of sovereignty gives herself over to this mortal, then it's like it's almost like a death in itself takes place. So whether or not it's simply that he's jealous, or whether that this is just the outcome, this is the consequence, this is the condition, and there's this perpetual wailing because whereas one falls in love, one there's both sides of it associated with that, right? There's pleasure, there's pain. And so she seems to represent that. It's almost kind of a warning about that, a warning about rash decisions, or a warning about that kind of risk-taking. And so I think the Drowning Wave story is quite interesting in that way. And I feel like that connects in with a lot of her stories about taking these men, particularly from these families. These seem to be the families that she favors. So the question becomes, when she takes them away, first of all, we don't really hear so much from the men, except in the one case where he manages to send a note in blood to be rescued, and so he ends up, she ends up releasing him. Like he's unwilling. He goes over there unwillingly when she captures him. But you notice that they're always captured through sleep, and this is something that I think is interesting. Just as I think like the wave can represent this. This tidal wave of feeling that knocks us off our feet, that knocks us off our center, off our balance. And sleep is one of those things too. I mean, sleep is something that is, sleep is refreshing, sleep is healing, and which kind of will bring us to the three birds. There's a healing quality to sleep, but sleep is also where we are unconscious. It's where we're not operating in a sphere with our eyes open and our feet on the ground and understanding what we're doing. She almost becomes this representation of the wildness of love, or the unpredictability of it, or the way in which one might take risks that can potentially unbalance or unground them. It's a treasure that maybe it's a treasure that can never really be taken or kept. So there tends to be this kind of representation. But I think it's interesting. We don't know about the other two men. I mean, obviously they were marrying other women, so perhaps those are the women they would have been happy with, and so they didn't necessarily need this other woman taking them away. But if she is one of the most beautiful women, then she is definitely an anima figure. What does the anima do? Mythologically, she's a seductress. She could be a sorceress. She could be a fairy woman. We had talked about the Len and She in another podcast, which is, known to be kind of an invention by W.B. Yeats. But nonetheless, the idea of the beautiful fairy woman who can make a man lovesick, it's almost like it's this power of the feminine that it's that piece of the feminine that has its hold over men. And it's the one, I think, in dark feminine lore that tends to be, this is why I think women, it's just like, oh, you've got to, beware of the woman who is beautiful and seductive, because she's going to, in the Hebrew, drag you down to Sheol, or she's going to, she's a kind of succubus, or she's, that she's got some kind of a thing where she's going to lead you to a bad place. And that bad place is where your, what's believed to be one's reason and logic and consciousness and keeping their feet on the ground, that this is kind of messed up. And this is what happens to us when we fall in love, right? You could fall in love with somebody, and if you have that strong pull towards somebody, this is not a rational process. And sometimes we can love people who are bad for us. You could be like, look, I know this person is no good, but I can't, stop thinking about them or whatever. We fall into these kinds of things. And so I don't know. I feel like it's, it's kind of the ecstasy of love, which is a way of having a deep experience of life, but it's also the way in which it can, sweep us out of our ordinary existence. When I think of water, I think of something that's very Piscean. And again, I know I'm kind of getting astrological here, but you have to remember that in astrological symbolism, there is a lot of this mythological symbolism is embedded in that. So when we talk Piscean, we're talking 12th house. This makes me think of 12th house, which is the realm of what's hidden. It's the realm of all of your dreams, your possibilities, your chance for freedom, and also the area where you could be just the opposite. You could be delusional. It could be your downfall. It could be where you have self-doubt. And so there's a very strong energy of this with this story, because that's the realm, it's like an archetypal realm. It's where there's something that's not quite formed, and when it takes a hold of you, when you are overcome by that tidal wave, so to speak, there's the potential of you to lose yourself. And in this case, Manana McLear, I think, she's losing herself in this, interestingly, even though she's kind of the embodiment of that. And I think there's kind of a thing of saying, well, if the anima is conquered, then when the anima is conquered, then in a certain sense, she does become dead. The role is dead. This frequently, a good illustration of this is when people meet, let's just say they're very amorously attracted to each other. Let's just say they fall in love, right? And then they decide that they're going to get married. And it's like, oh, I'm in love with you, blah, blah, blah. And then, but then once real life sets in, if you have a good relationship, you'll work through it, but it's going to end up more like a good friendship and not that, breathy romantic excitement. I mean, it's not something sustainable. That's why it's often considered to be illusory or dreamlike, because it does take you out of a state of consciousness. It's generally a projection of your own soul image onto somebody else. And because you're not really aware that that's what's going on, you may look, oh no, this person's perfect, they're everything, they're this, they're that. And, looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, as they say, right? And so you don't really see the person for who they are. And Jung has only said, there is no marriage without consciousness. Like, you have to be consciously aware of the person. And to take her onto the shore, I mean, Manana McLear may be saying, as this king figure, I mean, yes, there seems to be a jealousy there, but it's also kind of like, it's almost just the dangers of it. It's like, okay, you're in giving yourself over to this situation or to this person, to the anima allowing herself to be conquered. She then, and at least certainly in the mythologies they have, that she runs the risk of losing herself, right? Now, as I mentioned, the idea of sleep runs through these, in all of them. whether it be for a positive end or for a negative end. And again, this kind of gets back to the idea that what she represents is not something good or evil. She's not a good or evil figure. As it's shown, she can be very beneficent to some, and she can be very dangerous to others, which is the nature of fairies in general, and banshees are certainly a type of fairy. But it's interesting that she is the one who gives the warning. And honestly, if she has this strong kind of love connection to these particular Irish families, it's interesting that she's the Banshee, because it's like when one of them dies, it's like she's, bemoaning or bewailing the family that she loves, or that she has wanted to love, enough that she occasionally takes their members of their family and kind of brings them into her world, to either be released or not released, depending on whether or not the petitions to her to let them go is successful. And yeah, so she has this kind of a thing, but we also have her three birds, okay? Now, threes are fairly common in Irish folklore. I always think of the Morrigan when I think of three birds, but these are different birds. These are birds from the beautiful Isles, from the Blessed Isles, and they heal any sickness, but again, they do it this is all about song bringing one into slumber. And that's the same way in which Cliodhna gets taken by this wave, is that there's a bard who puts her to sleep with song. Similarly, these birds do it, but rather than drowning her, the birds, it has to do with the healing power of sleep, and the way in which when one retreats into that unconsciousness or retreats into that space, it gives the body a chance to rest, and it gives the psyche a chance to rest. So I think this is actually almost belying that aspect of, I'm going to call it that 12th house aspect, right? Because that just seems metaphorically to be the thing that kind of ties it together. That can be the space where you can examine new possibilities, right? Where you can regain your strength, where you can be quiet enough to get back into the consciousness that you need to be. Again, both physically and mentally. So there's a healing quality to this as well, and I think that's interesting, because she represents something very benevolent, but she can also act in that very tricksterish way, which is the way of the unconscious psyche. It's the way of the anima. And Jung had always talked about it, like he always talks about the anima injecting her poison. Like it's something. It's like a battle that goes on. Perhaps the myth of Circe is the best one that illustrates this, or Kirke, if you're, saying it in the Greek way, that she is, she lures men to her island and turns them into pigs, right? But as soon as, Odysseus has the moly plant and manages to thwart her spells, then she becomes an ally and an aid to him. So I think a lot of this is about coming into relationship to the feminine, because men are drawn in by the feminine, they're drawn in by beauty, right? They're drawn in by, and similarly, women are too. I mean, it's this this realm of wanting this kind of connection, but it's more superficial connection, right? It's this beauty that one sees, and and again, this jealous rivalry, like we see in the case of her with Keith. She, it's the way in which the feminine operates to connect with its opposite. Okay, the way the feminine and the masculine are trying to connect with each other, and the kinds of things that go on. It kind of goes through this kind of emotional drama that can be both healing, but it can also be very destructive. It is something that has to do more with floating along, with floating on the water, with going with the flow. It's not a logical process, and a lot of things that we see is connected with formal marriage and so forth. They're more like business contracts. Who's got the most money? Who's got the most power? What's the most, auspicious alliance, right? For my family and for my money and for my future. A lot of these things have very little to do with actual love. And love, in a certain sense, is maybe almost a subversion of that. We see the stories of the wealthy, either the man or the woman who falls in love with somebody below their station. And so you have this thing about, but the female here, I think, is a representation of sovereignty, okay? She is this kind of tricky character. She is beautiful, she is desirable, so she's one in whose web you can get caught. But the feminine is also the grantor of sovereignty. They are the ones with they're the powers of the land. And the grantor of sovereignty, if Cliodhna is a grantor of sovereignty, okay, it's almost like she takes these men occasionally as tribute for herself. Many things are taken from the land. The land sometimes takes things back, but it also talks about the way in which these natural impulses can be both healing, and they can be unifying, and they can be beneficent, and they can bring about abundance, but they're also something that could be dangerous if we are very careless about how we approach them, or if we don't balance them with this kind of grounded approach to them, or this more rational approach, not letting ourselves getting swept away, with feelings. So, I think the myth of Cliodhna is an interesting one psychologically, because it really tells us a lot about, I guess, it's kind of a good set of stories. It tells us about the land of fairy, it tells us about the Banshees, it tells us about this connection to the family on one level, but on another, it's telling us about the way in which feelings operate. And it reminds us that there's these strict categories of what's good and what's bad. Just because someone's warning you about something doesn't necessarily mean you don't take a risk on it, but it may not be. You may have to approach it in a very careful and strategic way, and not, not just through direct force or confrontation. So Cliodhna is kind of the essence of this feminine, and this feminine is something that you do have to be careful, because the man who does not want to be overtaken and taken away by the anima, which is what her power is. It's more of the sense of when she will grant you that emerald cup, give you that sovereignty. But again, with the reminder that you cannot be separated from the cup. That is what gives you that connection to the land. And her birds tend to show up as their spirits of the air, right? They're messengers. And really, if you think about air with its association, air is the intellect, right? But the song is still a very, very sweet song. Birds are also, they move fast, they're fleeting, right? They're here, and then they may take off very quickly. So they may represent that fleeting nature of something, but they also may be, with their song and with their chattering, may represent that balancing force of the intellect, right? That can bring that healing, because you fall into that deep sleep, but you may be able to take the time there to dream, to reflect, to think about things, to spend some time in isolation recovering before you are ready to face up to things again. But there's like the allowing for that time. It is sometimes said that depression is something that can have a cleansing effect. We talk about clinical depression, which of course is a great difficulty that needs to be treated, but certain depressions that we fall into, or funks that we fall into, may happen because, just like sometimes when we get very, very sick, it's just everything's just saying, hey, we need a time out, we need a break. And really too, if you think about the beautiful and pleasant nature of it, it could also be just saying we need to take time out to love, to have pleasure, to experience beauty, to not always be forging ahead on some quest or for some accomplishment or some action, which I think is another aspect of this realm. It's just kind of like, okay, this is the time to allow ourselves to look at possibility rather than to just charge ahead with something. So anyway, that's probably quite enough that I'm going to share. These are my thoughts that I have after reading through the stories of Cliodhna, for what that's worth for people. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to follow me on Instagram, I'm Chthonia Podcast, one word. On YouTube, youtube.com/@ChtoniaPodcast if you want to watch the video versions, if you're not currently watching that now. I am on Facebook, Chthonia Podcast, 2 words. And as I've been saying, these episodes are going to continue through December 2025 when the podcast will end. But there's a big catalog that's still out there on your favorite podcast app, and also one that's out there on YouTube. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.